Harum Oktob sin mas ibet baya. Imatipin sumpike sitsue yatue yatue yatue.
Egypt. It's a country in Africa. It's covered in sand, famous for pyramids and sphinxes.
Yeah, sand!
You like sand?
Love sand.
You like it when it gets in your ass cracked?
It exfoliates that shit right on out of there.
You know what else Egypt is famous for?
Hold on, I know the answer to this one. Mummies.
Yes, that is absolutely right.
Is it really?
Egypt is famous for its mothers. It's widely noted for them.
Wow, I got one right?
That's why we have Mother's Day, JD.
Okay, what's your point? I feel like you're making fun of me here.
First off, hey, welcome back to the podcast, JD.
Yeah, I'm sick.
Very convincing. You had tomb mold. That's why you had to take a couple months off.
Yes, I had a bad embalming experience.
Those curses, they're hard to get rid of.
Especially the one where you don't use protection.
Always wrap it, kids.
That's right. Always wrap it before it gets happened.
We've talked about a lot of classic monsters on the show. We've covered our vampires and our Frankensteins and our werewolves. What's an important classic monster we haven't covered on the show? He even has his own cereal.
Yummy Mummy.
Yeah, that was a good cereal, too.
Yeah, it was.
I hope they bring back Yummy Mummy and Fruit Brute this year.
Fruit Brute.
Yeah, Mummies. This is an episode that's been in the works for quite some time. Of the classic Universal monsters, the really important ones, not discussing Hall of the Ape Woman. Would it be fair to say that the Mummy is the least loved?
I don't know if it's the least loved, but it's definitely not as good.
The string of sequels they made to The Mummy in the 40s are all very, very similar. It's pretty clear that back in the day, Universal did not put a lot of effort into making those films.
Yeah.
But this has been the monster they've revisited, maybe more than any of the others.
Frankenstein had 5 sequels.
Referring to over the ages, we've now had 2 big-budget Mummy reboots.
Oh, yeah.
It does have a certain level of name recognition that maybe the others don't. Mummies, man.
They freak me out.
They freak me out. Don't go sticking your head into strange tombs and enacting curses and such.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket.
The mummy. Is it dead or alive? Human or inhuman? You'll know. You'll see. You'll feel the awful, creeping, crawling terror that stands your hair on end and brings a scream to your lips. There's nothing on earth like the mummy.
Something that's notable about the Mummy series is that of the Universal monsters, it's the only one that Universal owns outright. There's no public domain source.
Oh, really?
There's no popular legends they're drawing on here. The killer shambling mummy is a thing Universal invented. When we think of the classic Mummy movies, we think of a guy in bandages shambling around and strangling people, which really does not reflect the original 1931 The Mummy at all.
No, he's a voodoo master.
Well, it's not voodoo, it's Egyptian magic, but yes. And this
What
was
is Egyptian magic called?
Egypt Foo.
Egypt-foo?
Egypt Foo. I don't fucking know, man.
Egypt Foo?
That's what Joe Bob would call it, Egypt Foo.
Egypt Foo. Yeah. Alright, you pulled the Joe Bob card. You win. It's Egypt Foo.
The Mummy was made because they wanted to cash in on the tomb of Tutankhamun, which was touring the country in the 20s and 30s and was a pop culture phenomenon in its day. So they decided, hey, let's do a spooky movie about a mummy. And you've pointed this out before. The Mummy isn't in any of the crossover films.
Right. And I don't understand why. He's a perfect fit.
I guess it's because the Egyptian setting doesn't blend in with the European settings of the other films.
Couldn't there be a mummy exhibit in whatever the big London museum is?
Sure, something like that. This film's very much a gothic horror movie, very much a gothic romance. And some people will say that it has a lot in common with Dracula, which is fair.
Yeah.
What do you think of the 1931 The Mummy?
I think it's great.
Yeah, I like this movie a lot. For a long time, it wasn't as well regarded. It seems like this is the one people tend to shit on the most, but I think this movie's really good. It has that freaky spookiness.
Although the mummy is only actually in the movie for 2 minutes, and then it's just Imhotep doing magic.
Boris Karloff's only wrapped up in the bandages for that very first scene.
And think about it, back then it took 6 hours to pull off a look like that. Man, I'd be pissed. There would better been an after party or something like that. Or a wrap up,
a wrap up party.
A rap party.
So that opening scene is awesome. The guy who's not Dwight Fry.
Right. The not Dwight Fry.
The not Dwight Fry guy reads from the scroll, brings Imhotep back to life. There's that great shot of the dusty handprint where the scroll was. The guy goes crazy and delivers that great line. He went for a little walk.
He went for a little walk.
For years and years, I thought that was Dwight Fry.
Not Dwight Fry.
Yeah, it's
That's
not.
the guy's name, not Dwight Fry. Look it up.
I don't know what his real name is.
No one cares what his real name is.
It just seems like the crazy guy in the Universal movies. It was always Dwight Fry, right? But no, apparently not this time. This was directed by Carl Freund, who did the cinematography for Dracula, which might explain why this has that very expressionistic, shadowy direction.
And didn't it also use the Swan Lake music or whatever?
Yeah, it has the exact same music, plays over the opening credits. A good third of it is scored. This is 1931, so it's still pretty early in the sound era. This one was really beautifully shot. There's a fantastic sequence that cuts from the death mask of Anak Esenamen, that's the princess in this first movie, to the actress, Zita Johann, who's playing her modern-day descendant. This movie does have the mythic, mystical tone that I really, really dig. Boris Karloff is great as Frankenstein monster. Obviously, he's iconic. This movie allows him to maybe perform a little more.
Right. This movie, compared to any of the other mummy movies, is definitely seated in Egyptian lore.
Yeah, very much.
Even the Summers films do mention stuff from Egyptian lore. The lore itself propels the story a little bit.
Well, it's all about the wrath of the Egyptian gods.
The driving aspect of the story is not just some dead guy that wanted to get laid.
And I really love Karloff's performance in this. I think he's very sinister. He gets the Dracula shot in this on his eyes. Really,
I love that shot. It sends chills down your spine. Even a movie that I've seen 100 times.
Yeah, the spotlight on his eyes. And it works for this film because Imhotep Artif Bey is what his civilian identity is, has the hypnotic power. Really is very effective in this one. He is openly sinister. There's a scene where he's threatening people, but at the same time very much a romantic figure as well.
Yeah.
His whole goal throughout this film is to be reunited with his girlfriend, with the princess Ankh Esenamen. Helen is her modern-day descendant.
I mean, all these movies are the same. At least Imhotep doesn't need 10 leaves to survive, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Reincarnation is this reoccurring theme throughout all of them. In Dracula, Mina is just afraid of Dracula. There's really no connection between them. But in this one, there is very much a romantic connection between Artif Bey and Helen. She has a boring love interest that nobody gives a shit about, but you can feel this romantic tension between her and the mummy, which is interesting.
Now, I know we've had this discussion before, but in the book Dracula,
okay,
which one's the redhead and which one's the brunette?
Mina is the redhead, Lucy is the brunette in the book. They switch it around for the films a lot.
Ideally, if you're going to be married to a woman for all eternity, she might as well be a redhead. But anyhow.
Okay. Yeah, Frank Whipple is Helen's boring love interest that nobody gives a shit about. They have a...
Frank Whipple.
Yeah, I think that's...
Wimp is in his name.
They have pretty much a love at first sight thing. Imhotep, meanwhile, has been searching the eons for this girl. There was apparently a very lengthy sequence that was cut out of the film that showed him throughout the ages trying to connect with her in Versailles and ancient Rome. I'm not quite sure how that would make sense with him being in the tomb, but it would have been interesting to see that.
Probably would have explained it.
Probably. You can find stills online of Boris Karloff dressed in a powdered wig and stuff from those sequences.
I'm sorry.
Just that image is funny to you?
Just that image of...
of Frankenstein with the wig on.
Yeah. That's exactly what's going through my head right now.
And I really like Zita Johann as the girl in this. She was an interesting figure in real life. On the special features on the DVD, they talk about how she was into tarot cards and hypnotism, and she believed in past lives. So,
really?
Yeah, so she was into that kind of new agey, touchy-feely, kooky stuff. The Egyptian magic is very much alive, which is weird, and they would do this in a couple of the sequels, too. Usually in the old monster movies, it's you tampered in God's domain, and that's why you get punished. But in this one, it's you tampered in the Egyptian God's domain. You tampered in Osiris's domain, so you get punished. I wonder what the censors thought about that.
Well, maybe that's why it was Amun-Ra.
So you mentioned it yourself. There's no shambling and choking in this one. The mummy's methods of murder are a little different.
Yeah, magic. He shoots Hadokens and shit.
Not quite.
Okay, so they're invisible Hadokens. What's your point?
He does cast his magic spell over the reflection pool and cause Edward von Sloan to have a heart attack.
Damn right. Do you know if I had the power to cause people to have a heart attack, how many people we would be rid of in this world?
Yeah, I've got a list. Anyway, the only issue I really have with this movie is at the very end how they defeat the mummy. He's about to sacrifice the girl, and she prays to Isis, and the statue moves. Imhotep crumbles into dust right there, which is very spooky, but narratively is a clumsy device.
I mean, but it's cool.
In most other movies, you couldn't get away with the character praying to a god at the end to solve their problem. But yeah,
it's cool. Basically, Aquaman, the motherfucker, who just pointed his finger at him to suck all the moisture out.
We've talked about this before, how these old monster movies have a certain sort of spookiness to them.
You mean atmosphere?
Yeah, perhaps. There is definitely some atmosphere in this one. There's no fog because it's set in Egypt instead of Europe.
So, sandstorm.
Yeah. I watch these movies and I feel very relaxed and at home.
Oh, I love this movie. I watch it every Halloween. And nothing puts you in more of a Halloween-y mood than watching these old Universal monster movies.
Yeah.
Who shall defile the temples of the ancient gods? A cruel and violent death shall be his fate, and never shall his soul find rest. Such is the curse of Amun-Ra. And thus, the Princess Ananka was placed in a tomb. Caris, a prince of the royal house, who loved Ananka, his devotion was so great that he refused to believe that she was lost to him forever.
Universal Horror had 2 or 3 different cycles. In 1939, I think they re-released a couple of the films, and they were very, very popular. And this launched the Silver Age of Universal monster movies. In the 40s, they were really all about sequels. And one franchise that was absolutely churned out was the Mummy sequels. But can you even really call The Mummy's Hand from 1940 a sequel to The Mummy from 1931?
No.
Yeah.
There's nothing in common other than the stock footage to open the movie.
That's a big part of it. This is the start of a completely new series. Imhotep is not in this film. What's the mummy in this one?
Paris.
Paris Navidad.
I wanna wish you a mummy Christmas.
This movie opens with extensive stock footage, and it explains the rules of the mummy. What are the rules for Paris, JD?
10 leaves.
Yeah, how many 10 leaves do you give him?
3 to wake him up, 9 makes him unstoppable.
Actually, 3 to keep him alive, 9 to make him up and moving, and I think if you give him any more than that, he becomes too powerful to control.
Right. They never count that shit. They're always throwing in handfuls of 10 leaves. If you remember correctly, though, in the Mummy's Hand, it's not 9 10 leaves, it's 9 drops
of 10 of fluid, yeah.
Yes, that changes throughout the course of the series.
That varies. Seems like they're setting something up with all that talk about how if you give him too many leaves, he becomes unstoppable. But they never show that.
In Ghost of the Mummy's Cursed Hand.
Ghost of the Mummy's Cursed Hand.
You find out what happens when the ghost of his cursed hand gets 10 drops of tenno fluid while chomping on 10 tenno leaves.
And the full moon's important, too. They sometimes forget about that, but in this first couple movies, the full moon is when you have to boil the tanna leaf tea. If you miss it in this first movie, don't worry. They'll explain the rules all over again in each one of the sequels. They play that stock footage from the first film, except they make sure to replace Boris Karloff with Tim Tyler.
What?
Tim the Toolman Tyler.
Ooh.
What do you think of The Mummy's Hand?
Well, it's a little ashy.
I mean, the movie The Mummy's Hand, JD.
Yeah, it's not very good. I don't like it.
I enjoyed this one.
I mean, it's about as solid of a sequel as you could expect when the sequel doesn't have anything to do with the original. Because it's a completely different character,
right.
Completely different story. So it's actually not a sequel. It's a reboot.
It is indeed a reboot. You are totally correct about that. See, it's not new. Hollywood was rebooting franchises as far back as 1940. This one's actually set in Egypt. It follows a would-be lantern-jawed scientist named Steve Banning and his comic relief sidekick, Babe. They're looking for funding to dig in Egypt, and they eventually trick this somewhat senile magician into funding a dig, and they uncover the tomb of Princess Ananka in this one, and that pisses off the high priest of Karnak, who is this ancient Egyptian cabal designated throughout the years to guard Princess Ananka's tomb.
And he also looks like Arnold Vosloo.
Yeah, let's talk about George Zucco. George Zucco plays the high priest of Karnak in this one, and he shows up in a couple of sequels. And JD pointed out while you were watching this that he looks like Arnold Vosloo.
Only in the profile, though.
I totally see it. He's like Lionel Atwill, and Dwight Fry was another one. He was one of those Universal company players. George Zucco just showed up in a lot of these. This movie's only about an hour long. All of these Mummy sequels are only about an hour long. Paris doesn't show up until the 40-minute point in this one.
Yeah, first half of this movie is all the first movie.
They show a lot of stock footage. Another thing, there's always that scene where the High Priest of Karnak, George Zucco's the apprentice in this one. He becomes the master in the sequels. The master always explains to the apprentice the history of Paris.
And to never fall in love with a woman.
Which they always do. I kind of like that stuff with Steve and Babe goofing around in Egypt and they get into a bar fight.
That stuff is good.
The goofy magician is fun. The magic tricks I like.
Well, you see, I like all that. It's actually the mummy stuff of this movie that I don't really care for.
There is a problem with the mummy as a monster. He's very, very slow.
On this one, they did something cool by blacking out the eyes.
There was no digital technology at the time, so they just went on actual negative of the movie and they colored in his eyes in a few shots. Imagine how painstaking that must have been.
Yeah, but see, that just makes me appreciate those old movies more.
The Mummy is very, very slow. He shambles around, and inevitably he has to get the drop on people to grab them. He has to sneak up on them and surprise them, and then they'll turn around and go, present their neck to him, and then he can grab them and strangle them.
Somebody comes up behind me and scares me, the first thing I do is swing. He just goes, eek!
You would think a mummy being made of dried bones and ash would probably crumble pretty easily if you hit it hard. One thing I do like about this, though, is the goofy comic relief character actually does something. He doesn't just stand around and tell jokes, he actually kills the bad guy at the end, or appears to, anyway.
Yeah, he shoots Arnold Vosloo.
Yeah, he shoots George Zucco, and he rolls down the stairs.
I refuse to call him George Zucco. It's Arnold Vosloo. Arnold Vosloo is literally immortal, and he's actually a mummy. He's just never been stopped by Brendan Fraser. That part was made up, but...
We do have the Screaming Babe tied to the altar at the end, one of those classic pulpy images.
Okay, now when you say Screaming Babe, do you mean his best friend Babe, or...
I mean the girl.
Oh, the girl Babe.
Yeah, the love interest. The thing with Carice is he is a Tana Leaf junkie.
Yeah. It's like when it spills down on the floor, and he's sitting there trying to slurp it up.
Right, that's how they kill the mummy. They spill the Tana Leaf tea on the floor, and he gets down on his hands and knees, and is slurping it up, and then the guy
so now I have
sets
a
him
question.
on fire.
Granted, this was 1940.
Okay.
But huge continuity error here.
We'll get into some continuity errors later.
Well, there's already one. So when he kneels down to slurp, any more than 9 drops of Tenity makes him unstoppable. So how do they gauge that? If he's down slurping it, is it 9 slurps, or is it equal to the volume of 9 drops? Because if it's equal to the volume of 9 drops and he gets 2 slurps in, we're fucked.
I have no idea, man. I cannot answer that question. I do not know.
And also, he has 13 drinks of that Tenity throughout the course of this movie anyway. Is there a time period? Is it per day, or is it per millennium? What is it?
I think we're all putting more thought into this than the actual writers of the movie did.
This is why... I can't even say this is why movies are better now.
This one, it's very, very pulpy. It's basically a pulp adventure film with a mummy in it. But I like it. I like the characters. I like the cast. Peggy Moran plays the magician's daughter. She's cool, even if she does inexplicably fall in love with the hero before the end. And the mummy stuff is fun, but I do kind of agree with you that it's maybe the least fun part of this film.
Right. And I'm sorry, that's why I don't like this movie, because, when I go see The Mummy's Hand, I want to see mummy action. There's 10 minutes of mummy action in this movie.
Gets a little better in the later ones. They do have a little more mummy stuff in the...
Yeah, well, that doesn't help them. Now does it?
Spawned from the depths of doom comes the most fearful monster of the ages to strike with paralyzing terror the despoilers of ancient tombs. Here is new horror by the master of menace, Lon Chaney as the Mummy, with Dick Foran, John Hubbard, Ellis Knox, George Zucco, Wallace Ford, Turon Bay in The Mummy's Tomb.
Creature that's been alive for over 3,000 years is in this town. We've got to run it down.
1942, we get a sequel to that sequel, The Mummy's Tomb. Now, the titles for these films don't really make a lot of sense. The Mummy's Hand is where they actually uncover the tomb. The Mummy's Tomb is set in America, in Massachusetts, and it's about the people who uncovered the tomb 30 years ago being killed. So that's really about the Mummy's Curse.
The first cover should have been The Mummy's Tomb.
Right.
The second one should have been The Mummy's Curse.
I think The Mummy's Ghost fits for the fourth one, and I guess you could call the last one The Mummy's Hand. The Mummy's Hand is pretty pivotal in all of them. It's set 30 years after The Mummy's Hand, so if we can assume that The Mummy's Hand is set in 1940, when it was released, and this film is 30 years later, that means this movie is set in 1970. But I gotta tell you, 1970 looks a lot like 1942.
Let's think about this for a second. King Tutankhamun's tomb was found in the late 1800s, okay? So we'll say 1890, alright? I know that's probably not correct, but we'll say 1890, which would have sparked a huge mummy find craze. Carice, they don't actually give a time period for that, do they?
Don't think they do, no.
Okay, so now we can assume that probably by 1910, okay, they found Carice.
Yeah, that's usually what I end up doing. I fan wank it so that The Mummy's Hand's actually set in the early 1900s, and this is 1940. 30 years after the events of that film, Steve Banning has a wife and a son, and his son's engaged, and that's where we get our stock footage in this one. The film opens with him regaling his family with the story of how they found the Mummy's tomb, and we get...
and then slightly older Arnold Vosloo.
It looked like they killed off George Zucco at the end of the last one, but he somehow survived.
And then at some point in time, Arnold Vosloo got reverse Benjamin Button disease.
He's not the only one who comes back to life. In the last one, Carice was seemingly burned completely to ashes. And in this one, Carice is back. He's just been burned a little bit. He's missing an eyeball now. There is
He's
the
like
mask.
a mummy pirate. Arr,
He is a mummy pirate. We have a new apprentice, which is Turhan Bey, who is actually Turkish, but looks a little Egyptian. The full moon pops out. They give Carice his Tana leaf, and he's up to his own business again, killing off the survivors of the expedition. What do you think of this one? Doesn't inspire any feelings
None
in
of
you?
these movies inspired any feelings in me.
I do admit all these sequels are very, very similar. But this one does have one major change. We have Lon Chaney Jr. stepping into the part of the mummy.
Yeah, and he was lost the whole time.
Yeah, well, that's the legend. It's no legend that he hated this character. The Mummy was always his least favorite monster. He hated that the makeup took so long to apply. He hated that the character gave him the least to do. All he really does is shamble around with one arm against his chest, dragging the leg behind him. He doesn't have much to do. The rumor is that he would hide a canister of vodka in his bandages and have a tube going up through the bandages into his mouth. Throughout filming, he would be sucking on some vodka. And we do know Lon Chaney was a raging alcoholic, so I believe that. The character doesn't give him a lot to do, but you can see Chaney trying. This is really the movie where Khary starts doing the thing with his hand bandaged to his chest, dragging the leg behind him. And I do love the makeup. If you look at the old age makeup on Wallace Ford and Dick Foran and George Zucco, they do look like they're 30 years older.
I see that argument, and I raise you a mummy thong.
Oh god, okay. I never even noticed this until you pointed it out, and now I can't unsee it. Khary has a bit of a bandage wedgie.
It's a full-on fucking G-string.
If you look at the way the bandages are positioned, it does look somewhat suggestive. Jesus Christ, JD, you fucking ruined these movies forever for me now. You know, because now I'm watching them and all I can think about is Lon Chaney's mummy pulling on his G-string before he goes out on stage and strips. God damn it.
I didn't make the makeup. I don't understand how the person that made that makeup didn't look at that and be like, you know, that looks like a thong.
Anyway, they switched the setting from Egypt to Mapleton, Massachusetts in this one. What do you think of that idea of an Egyptian mummy wandering around New England?
It's a cool concept, but I just don't know that it's executed well.
Each of these sequels tries to do something different with the mummy to make him a viable threat. Like I said, taken on his own, he's not very threatened. It's a shambling thing you can easily outrun. So in this one, it's kind of like he has an influence over the environment. There's a lot of really great work with shadows in this film. When Khary is out on the town, you see a shadow pass over a sleeping family's bed. It upsets a group of dogs and horse, disrupts some necking teenagers.
Yeah, it does that.
That stuff is cool. Khary is a tough guy. He gets shot and knocked over the head with chairs, and they swing torches at him, and he keeps going.
Yeah, because he was sloshed.
He's a drunk mummy. Once again, Tyrion Bay's character is explicitly warned not to fall in love, which he immediately does. He falls in love with the hero's fiancée. Something that's kind of hilarious about this film is anytime the younger Banning is getting romantic with his girl, Tyrion Bay is always hanging out in the background watching him angry. We do get a mob of torches and pitchforks in this one, which is nice. And once again, the mummy goes up in flames, at least until the next one. Honestly, this is probably my favorite of the Khary's films, which I know is faint praise, because all these movies are the same. I feel like this one has some, I'm going to use the word, decent atmosphere, and I like some of the mummy stuff in this one.
I'll agree with that. I do like the use of the shadows and the atmosphere, and the mummy makeup is decent with the exception of the thong,
which I will never be able to unsee.
I think these movies would almost be better if they would take two of them, cut them together to make one movie.
Well, that's basically what Hammer did. The Hammer Mummy remake takes elements from all of these films and squishes them together.
It was no thief that killed Ben, Mrs. Evans, and nothing human tore through that wall.
I'll take her back, Harris. Together we'll go to Arkham. I swear it.
You can't go in that swamp. It's certain death.
Let go of me.
1944, we get The Mummy's Ghost, and for a change, this one doesn't start with stock footage. Instead, we have a college professor giving an exposition-filled monologue about what happened in the last movie.
Right.
I don't know if that's an improvement, better or worse.
I think it was like, okay guys, we cannot show them the stock footage again.
You gotta remember, there was no home video in 1944. Maybe it was actually useful to go to the theater and get a reminder of what happened last time. The Mummy's Ghost has an interesting element to it, and it's really about the modern-day incarnation of Princess Ananka, who doesn't know she's a reincarnation of an Egyptian princess. Throughout the film, she's turning into a mummy, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, this is our first really huge continuity fuck-up. The name of the cult that protects Khari's changed. They're no longer the priests of Karnak, now they're the priests of Arkhim.
You mean the priest of...
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Once again, George Zucco is back, so it's still the same cult.
So Arnold Vosloo is back.
Arnold Vosloo is in this one. John Carradine plays the priest.
Do I have to pay him if I keep using his name?
I think we're good. I don't think Arnold Vosloo is going to sue us. In the last one, Khari was seemingly burned to ash, but they boil some tanna leaf tea, and I guess it just summons him out of thin air, and he's back.
Well, you see, they used 20 tanna leaves, and it teleported Khari's to where they're at.
Damn, those tanna leaves can do anything.
Right?
Ramsey Ames plays the girl in this, Amina, who is slowly turning into Princess Ananka. The Val Lewton movies like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie were out at this point, and I wonder if Universal wanted to do something sort of like that, but they stuck it in a Mummy sequel where they have to do the same old stuff of a dusty old mummy rampaging across New England. You do have a lot of standard stuff, the mummy strangling people, it's what he does. Like I said, they do kind of try to do something different in each movie, and the last one, the idea was, oh, let's make make the mummy affect the environment. And in this one, they emphasize his indestructible strength. Because when he first pops up, he walks through a wooden fence and just slams into it once and goes through it. One of my favorite sequences in this film, where John Carradine and Carice go to the museum where Ananka's body is, and it crumbles into dust when they touch it. Carice just goes apeshit and destroys the whole museum, smashing things and turning stuff over. He's angry.
I don't remember any of this.
You don't remember any of this?
And I just watched this movie last week.
Once again, the high priest falls in love with the girl. John Carradine has this weird moment of voiceover where he convinces himself that, yeah, it's okay if I fuck this girl. That pisses off Carice. He strangles him, throws him out a window.
Well, he had to, or otherwise he couldn't have been Dracula.
It's true. It's true. What The Mummy's Ghost is really famous for, and what really distinguishes it from the other films in the series, is its ending. Do you remember the ending, JD? The girl dies.
Oh, yeah, he carries her into the bog. If any of our listeners are from Massachusetts, please tell us if there's any Massachusetts swamp. I want to know if there's any swamps from Boston.
For the 10 people listening to this. Kind of a downbeat ending. Normally in these 40s monster movies, the hero stops the monster, him and the girl go off together. But no, in this one, Carice carries the girl into the bog, and they both die. The movie ends with don't meddle in God's domain, but it's, again, talking about the Egyptian gods, which is interesting and different.
How did the censors feel about that?
I don't know. Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting to me. I would figure like glorifying pagan religion would be a no-no under the Hays Code.
Maybe not.
The Mummy's Ghost is pretty unremarkable in a lot of ways. It's pretty much the same movie as the last two, but there are one or two interesting bits about it that I do like.
Who's Carice?
It's so hard to explain. Sometimes it seems as if I belong to a different world.
Hey, looks like the imprint of a man's body. A big man, too.
Unless I'm mistaken, a mummy was buried here.
In a room beneath the chapel, I found the bodies of freshly murdered men.
Betty, what happened?
He brought me here. I was looking for you.
Master, I meant no harm.
But then we get to The Mummy's Curse. Same year, 1944. The end of the Kari series. Most people consider this the weakest of the sequels.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
What is weird about this? According to Wikipedia, this movie is set in 1995, because it is set 25 years after The Mummy's Tomb and The Mummy's Ghost, which were set 30 years after The Mummy's Hand. If we are to assume that The Mummy's Hand was set in 1940, that means the sequels are set in 70, and this is 25 years after that. This movie is set in 1995, in our time, JD.
But if it took place in 1910, and then 30 years later was 1940, and then 25 years later it becomes 1965.
But this doesn't look like 1965, and it certainly doesn't look like 1995.
Yeah, but it looks more like 1965 than it does 1995.
I don't know, maybe New Orleans is 10 years behind the rest of the country anyway. That's going to piss off our non-existent listeners, and the Cajun demographic's going to be so angry with us.
The Mummy is the Rougarou. Breaking news.
Oh my god, they should have had the Mummy fight the Rougarou.
Right? Giant man-eating alligator thing.
Werewolf, alligator, witch thing, yeah. So 1995 looks a lot like 1944, which is only really the first big continuity gap in this. Where is this movie set? We've already mentioned it, but where is this movie set?
Louisiana.
Yeah, it's set in New Orleans. And where were the last two set?
Massachusetts.
Yeah. How the fuck did Carice and the princess get from Massachusetts to New Orleans?
There's a magical portal in the Massachusetts bog that when he went into it, it teleported them straight to New Orleans.
But even that doesn't make any sense, because all the references to Swifting College and Mapleton are intact. They're just in a different state.
Magic.
What really happened is, obviously the writer said, hey, let's set this one in New Orleans. But wasn't the last one set in Massachusetts? Nobody's going to notice. But we did notice.
Well, we noticed because we watched all of them back to back.
I guess the people going to the theaters probably didn't notice anyway.
If they decided not to recap the last story, theoretically speaking, those idiots in 1944 probably fell for that shit.
The stock footage comes back in a big way in this one. No George Zucco this time.
Arnold Vosloo?
I guess by 1995 he passed away.
Sans Vosloo.
The Sans Vosloo. The new apprentice in this one is played by Martin Kovacs, who was in a couple of Universal monster movies. Who was in House of Horrors with Rondo Hatton and The Frozen Ghost. You noted while watching this today that stock footage from 1940 looks like shit in this movie from 1944.
Yeah.
They did not go to any effort to disguise this. By this point, the formula is starting to feel very tired. This one follows all of the exact same beats. Mummy's revived. He goes on a rampage. In the last reel, one of the high priests develops a burning lust for the female
Mummy's
love
hand.
interest. Carice turns on his boss. Rinse, repeat. There is a moment in this film that's hilarious where the mummy is chasing after a girl and she gets in a car and drives away, and you can almost see him snap his fingers and go, drat! Curses! Yeah. Aside from some occasional New Orleans atmosphere, the only thing that's really different about this one is Princess Ananka arises from the bog and washes the dirt off her face, and she's a normal-looking girl, which is interesting. I wish they would have done a little more with that. The subplot that's in the movie, and they don't really do much with it. And that shot of her waking up is cool. Virginia North is that actress, by the way, and yes, she's lovely. The only really exciting stuff in this movie is when Martin Kolsex, I think I've said his name differently every time I've talked about it. When he fights the hero in the last act, Carice breaks some pipes, causes a cave, and gets buried. The girl turns back into a mummy, and that's the end of the plot as it were. General thoughts on The Mummy's Curse.
Boring.
Yeah, it's pretty slow.
Where will we find the mummy?
Don't worry, the mummy will find you.
You'll howl as you follow Bud and Lou in a strange land where exotic dancers perform ancient rituals. You'll scream at this mystic world of mad magic and uproarious adventure, starring Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. Imagine Lou trying to be charming to a snake. And Bud at the end of his rope. Your nerves will jangle as they tangle with terror, meddle with murder, and try to elude a curse 4,000 years old.
The formula had worn out its welcome. Which is probably why we didn't get another one of these movies until 11 years later. In its own way, a very tired film that was exhausting a formula that was way overdone. What do we think of Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy from 1955?
Well, it's definitely better than at least the last two sequels.
Ooh, I don't know.
It's definitely better than the last sequel.
This one's pretty dire. This is the last
Meet the Monster.
And it's also, I believe, the last movie they did together for Universal. Apparently there was some tension between Abbott and Costello by this point in their career.
That explains a lot.
They actually have a lot of separate screen time in this one, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
This one, it does return the mummy to Egypt. Plot concerns three separate groups interested in a bandaged corpse. A wily female tomb raider in search of treasure, the followers of Clarice, determined to return him to home, and Bud and Lou, who just kind of bumble into things. Is this supposed to be a different mummy from the other sequels?
I think so.
Yeah, they don't say Carice, they say Clarice, and they don't say Princess Ananka, they say Princess Aura. There's no mention of Karnak or Akeem. The MacGuffin for this is a medallion. The goofiness entails when Costello swallows this amulet and hijinks ensue. So you like this one?
I'm going to go as far to say as I like it. I haven't watched the other two Meet the Monsters, Invisible Man and Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
But comparatively to Meet Frankenstein, definitely a big drop in quality.
Yeah, of the Abbott and Costello Meet the Monster movies, Frankenstein's a classic. Invisible Man's good. If you can count Abbott and Costello Meet Boris Karloff, the killer, that one's not bad. Meet Jekyll and Hyde is not too hot, and this one is the weakest Abbott and Costello film I've seen.
Really?
Yeah.
Even with the Who's on First riff?
That's the thing, a lot of the gags in this movie are recycled from other movies. There's a gag about picks and shovels that is very reminiscent of Who's on First. There's a scene where people are hiding behind the wall and their hands are reaching through that's very similar to a gag in Meet Frankenstein. There's a moment where they discover some dead bodies that are very similar to Meet Boris Karloff. Blue and Bud seem very tired in this film. It's not their best work. Costello's scaredy cat gimmick worn out its welcome, I think.
There's one point where Abbott is dressed up as a mummy.
Right, yeah, that does happen.
Running through the tomb yelling, Costello! Costello! Where are you, Costello?
Yeah. There's a long gag where Costello is running through a temple and running into skeletons or a giant iguana, and that stuff.
Okay, well, I actually like the giant iguana.
Where the fuck did the giant iguana come from?
It caught me off guard, and I laughed my ass off at it. I was not expecting there to be a giant-ass fucking iguana.
Why is there a giant iguana in this
Magic.
movie? There's a gag where Bud gets dressed up as a mummy, but the thugs are dressed up as mummies, and the real mummy is out there too, and that just goes on. Really got sick of that. Even the monster stuff in this is pretty lame. The makeup's terrible. It looks like a really cheesy rubber mask with some bandages wrapped around his face. And Edwin Parker is the guy playing the mummy in this, and he yells way too much.
Yeah.
He even runs at one point, which is weird. I've not seen all of Abbott Costello's movies or their TV shows or whatever, but definitely a low point in their career. And pretty glamorous ending for the Mummy franchise. But you seem to enjoy this one a little more than I do.
But it's just more because it's Abbott Costello.
Egypt, 4,000 years ago, a land of strange rituals and savage cruelty. Many of their secrets are still hidden from the eyes of 20th century man. Secrets that protect their dead. Supernatural powers that once released can live again in our modern world. The Mummy, the living dead, bringing terror and death across 4,000 years.
He who robs the graves of Egypt dies.
JD stepped out of the room for a little bit, and while he's gone, I'm going to cover the Hammer Mummy franchise. The year is 1959. Hammer previously did versions of Frankenstein and Dracula, and those are obviously an attempt to replicate the cycle of classic monster movies produced by Universal. Neither of those movies were direct remakes, merely new adaptations of public domain stories. After that, Hammer entered into an official agreement with Universal. The first of these officially sanctioned remakes was The Mummy. Hammer's The Mummy is not a direct remake of any of the Universal Mummy movies. Instead, it it mixes and matches elements from all of the Universal films. The basic story, a mummy is unleashed in an urban city seeking vengeance on those that desecrated its tomb, is taken from The Mummy's Tomb. Character names and the mummy's background are from The Mummy's Hand. The mummy is Carice, and the hero is John Banning, also from that film. The finale, set in a swamp, was likely inspired by The Mummy's ghost. The only thing taken from the 32 original is the opening scene where an archaeologist accidentally awakens the mummy and is driven mad by the sight. Hammer adds their own elements by ditching the Tana leaves and moving the story to 1890s England. By shifting the location to jolly old London, Hammer definitely puts their stamp on the story. Early on, the crate-carrying Carice is tossed off a wagon and lands in a bog. This grants the film the brilliant side of the mummy, caked with mud, rising out of the wetlands. This is but one example of the film's typically Hammer-esque atmosphere. Terence Fisher, the director, who also made Horror of Dracula and Curse of Frankenstein, contributes some very colorful direction. Bright reds and greens characterize several scenes. As for the content, The Mummy is relatively low on the sex appeal that defined Hammer's other monster movies, but it compensates by making Carice unstoppable. He's repeatedly shot, he bursts through windows and doors, and in one especially memorable moment, he gets run through with a spear, and none of it slows him down. This further distinguishes the British Mummy from his more sluggish American counterpart. Hammer's The Mummy is probably scarier than any of Universal's Carice movies too. The slightly agile mummy creates more intense attack sequences. When Carice seeks out the madman who first found his tomb, he bursts through the window. The attacks are well orchestrated, but the film's best moment involves 0 undead corpses. Once Banning becomes convinced that Egyptian occultist Memehet Bey, another name taken from the mummy's tomb, has something to do with the murders, he confronts the man. What follows is a tense conversation where the audience is left wondering if Bey will act rashly, while Banning attempts to get a rise out of him. Something else Hammer's The Mummy has over the Universal original is Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Cushing is in top form here. His hero is both warm during the charming scenes where he flirts with his wife, but also a man of action, investigating the murders and taking the fight to his enemies. Naturally, Cushing also has an air of intelligence, making his character especially likable. You wouldn't think a corpse wrapped in filthy linens would allow Christopher Lee much chance for acting. He makes the most of what he's given. Banning's wife, played by a gorgeous but underutilized Yvonne Finnereau, is the spitting image of Carice's princess. This not only leads to the classical image of the monster carrying the maiden in his arms, but also makes Carice more sympathetic. The only time Lee is outside his wrappings is during a lengthy flashback, which derails the movie's pacing. The Mummy isn't quite up to the standards of Curse of Frankenstein or Horror of Dracula, but don't take that as a slam. Hammer's The Mummy is another solid monster movie from the iconic studio. Universal's Carice films have their charms, but I believe this one to be superior to any of them.
Warning! Beware! The curse of the mummy's tomb. Beware! You infidels and unbelievers, take heed of the curse. Do not meddle with the secrets of the dead. And all of you here now, beware! The forbidden secrets of life and death. The curse of the mummy's tomb reveals the mystery, the murder, the terrifying story of a rampaging bandage and bone monster stalking those who defiled its tomb of terror.
Out of Universal's classic horror characters, I've always felt that the Mummy was the monster they cared the least about. The sequels were turned out really quickly, and each of them featured nearly identical stories. When it was Hammer's turn to create a series of Mummy movies, they approached the monster in a similar fashion. There was a 4-year gap between 1959's The Mummy and 1964's The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, suggesting Hammer wasn't eager to capitalize on the first one's success. The second Mummy is clearly cheaper than the first, resulting in one of the cheesier Hammer horror experiences. It's set in 1900 and begins with what else? A group of archaeologists uncovering an Egyptian tomb. John Bray discovers the mummy of Ra-en-tet pharaoh that was murdered by his jealous brother. The excavation is being funded by Alexander King, an American showman who's determined to take the mummy on a carnival-style roadshow. When they get back to England, the mummy disappears mysteriously. Soon, the wrapped-up corpse rises to its feet and begins to kill everyone who desecrated his tomb. Curse of the Mummy's Tomb only runs 80 minutes long. The mummy doesn't appear until 40 minutes into the film. That presents something of a problem. The film attempts to make up for the lack of mummy action in a few ways. First off, it has a band of Egyptian bandits chopping off a guy's arm in the first scene. This being a 60s Hammer film, there's some sensual pleasures on display too. Female lead Jeanne Rowland wears a number of low-cut gowns, while another scene lingers on a belly dancer's wiggling midriff. These moments are mildly diverting, but they are bordered by very long scenes of people standing around and talking. This grants The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb a pace that's about as fast as a shambling corpse. Once the mummy starts to actually do stuff, the film picks up considerably. Yes, makeup design is a serious step down from the first film. The unique side credited Christopher Lee as a moldy, mud-slicked mummy has been replaced with some guy named Dickie Owen, wearing green bandages and an unconvincingly square mask. However, the mummy murder scenes are solid enough. The American showman gets throttled in a foggy stairway. More atmospheric fog is employed when the mummy bursts through a door into a library. That leads to a solid scene of a net falling on the undead bean, which concludes with a guy getting his head squished, off-screen, but still pretty gruesome for 1964. The script also packs in a genuinely unexpected twist ending. The viewer figures that the human bad guy isn't to be trusted, but his true identity is a bit unexpected. Curse of the Mummy's Tomb is mostly a bit of a slog, but it does feature a few memorable moments. The film was directed by Michael Carreras, who mostly worked as a producer for Hammer. Carreras' visual sense is solid. The film presents its necessary exposition in an interesting manner. The love interest Annette discusses the mummy's history while the camera pans over the gold engravings on his sarcophagus. That's a clever way to illustrate the connection between history and the artifact that sadly immediately segues into an uninspired flashback. Later, when the American showman is giving his spiel about uncovering the mummy's tomb, we are greeted with an interesting point of view shot of someone entering the dusty site. They're little moments, but they stick out in an otherwise uninteresting feature. In its final moments, the Curse of the Mummy's Tomb attempts to give its monster a tragic side, similar to what Christopher Lee's Clarice had in the first film. It's too little too late. Hammer's second Mummy movie doesn't have the ferocity or glamour of the company's first Mummy movie. The cast is decent, but lacks the presence of Cushing and Lee. Patient monster fans might eventually be satisfied by this one, as the mummy action is satisfying once it finally happens. Yet patience might be more than a movie called The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb should ask of its audience.
Nightmare terror from the tomb. An ancient curse comes to life to strangle the living and raise the dead. Here is the horror and the terror of a story that began in ancient Egypt when Ka-Tubey, a son of Pharaoh, died in the desert and was covered in the shroud that bore the sacred power of life and death. Warning to every creature of flesh and blood, beware the beat of the cloth-wrapped feet. Beware the curse of the mummy's shroud. Dead 1,000 years, now he lives and breathes to avenge an ancient curse.
3 years after Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, somebody at Hammer obviously said, well, I guess it's time to make another one. John Geeling would both write and direct The Mummy's Shroud. Geeling was responsible for a number of minor Hammer classics like Plague of the Zombies and The Reptile, but after The Mummy's Shroud, he would mostly retire from directing features and turn his focus to television. What does that tell you about this movie? The Mummy's Shroud does have the novelty of actually being set in Egypt for the most part. It begins with a lengthy flashback explaining the origins of the mummy. Centuries ago, the pharaoh finally beget an heir, a boy named Ka-Tubey. This pissed off the pharaoh's brother who had hoped to take the throne, so he murdered his brother. Prim, Ka-Tubey's bodyguard, carried the boy into the desert. However, the boy ended up dying of dehydration and was buried with a magical shroud. In 1920, the mummies of Prim and Ka-Tubey are uncovered by Sir Basil Walden. Some evil guys sneak into the museum, read from the shroud, and awaken Prim's mummy in order to seek vengeance on those that disturbed the boy pharaoh's tomb. A big problem with the previous Hammer mummy movie was its pacing. For only an 80-minute feature, it took nearly half an hour to get to the good stuff. The Mummy's Shroud is 10 minutes longer and somehow even more laboriously paced. While I appreciate the movie taking the time to establish the mummy's origin in so much detail, that sluggish opening flashback sets the tone. There are long scenes devoted to people sitting in a tent during a sandstorm. It doesn't help that the plot is about as generic as a mummy story can get. The story follows a simple A to B structure. Englishmen dig up mummy, the offensive Arabian stereotypes awaken the mummy, who then goes about killing the Englishmen. That's basic mummery 101, and the script deviates little from that setup. With such a threadbare premise, the Mummy's Shroud has to include some extraneous subplots to stretch the story to feature length. Sir Basil was bitten by a snake while excavating the tomb. Stanley Preston, the rich but lazy financier of the trip, uses this as an excuse to get Basil declared insane. Preston then attempts to take full credit for the discovery. You'll notice this is really similar to the subplot featuring the sideshow exhibitor in Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Preston, as played by John Phillips, is such an obvious bad guy that his actions are far from surprising. This plot point doesn't end up mattering much either, once the mummy starts killing everybody. When Prim's mummy is awoken, the Mummy's Shroud does pick up the pace a little. This is despite the mummy, played once again by the amusingly named Dickie Owen, looking like crap. The bandages are far too white, the face looks drawn on, and the makeup is generally unconvincing. However, there are a few nice touches, such as the shot of the mummy awakening, blinking the debris out of his eye sockets, or the conclusion where the mummy similarly crumbles to dust. The murder scenes are more creative. The mummy does the typical things like strangling and crushing bones, but he also pours acid on people and tosses their bodies from windows. The Mummy's Shroud is easily the weakest of Hammer's mummy cycle. If Curse of the Mummy's Tomb felt like a standard spook show, made to cash in on the titular monster's name recognition, Hammer's third mummy outing somehow fits that description even better. Once the action starts, it becomes alright, but you're gonna have to wait a long time. It's pretty clear that these films were not top priority for the studio. Having said that, The Mummy's Shroud does feature a fantastic tagline: beware the beat of cloth-wrapped feet. If only the movie lived up to that lurid prose in any way, shape, or form.
For thousands upon thousands of years she lay there, perfectly preserved, in all her beauty, in all her evil.
We do have her name. Tara.
Across the centuries to another time, to another place, she is back amongst the living to claim all that is hers. In the name of Tara, she is back to destroy those who helped to raise her evil flesh and blood from the mummy's tomb.
1971 probably seemed like a weird time for Hammer to dig up their little-loved Mummy series. Hammer was squarely in their twilight years by this point, when the studio started adding edgier content to their monster movies in hopes of competing with more explicit horror films. How do you sex up a mummy? Well, the answer is, you don't. Blood from the Mummy's Tomb is an adaptation of The Jewel of Seven Stars, Bram Stoker's novel about turn-of-the-century English science meeting ancient Egyptian occultism. The film does not feature a lumbering, linen-wrapped killer strangling archaeologists. Instead, the approach is both more psychological and a little more exploitative. The film is about Margaret, the daughter of Dr. Fuchs, an archaeologist whose basement is filled with strange, ancient Egyptian artifacts. Margaret is having strange dreams about tombs and a mummy that doesn't seem to age. People connected to Fuchs' research begin to die mysteriously. The old man himself falls into a strange coma following a spectral attack. A stranger named Todd Browning arrives at the house. He begins to tell Margaret that she is the reincarnation of Tira, the unaging mummy in the basement, an Egyptian princess so wicked her existence has been scratched from history, and Tara is planning on being reborn. From its opening minutes, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb suggests a tone different than most Hammer horror flicks. The opening credits appear over a shot of stars passing by. What follows is a mostly silent scene showing the ritual that binded Queen Tara. Her nearly nude body is laid in her sarcophagus, her hand is chopped off, and then the tomb is healed. After exiting the tomb, the men and women have their throats torn open by a wind. It's revealed to be Margaret's sleeping vision and has a suitably dreamlike tone. That slightly off aspect is carried throughout most of the movie. A standout sequence begins with the camera craning madly around the halls of an insane asylum. Afterwards, a stuffed cobra comes to life, but is only seen in shadows, striking its victim dead with invisible blows. Later, a man's car is seemingly blown off the road, the driver struck dead by an unseen force. Blood from the Mummy's Tomb lulls the viewer into a weird mood, linked to a traditional narrative but feeling more surreal than expected. Bram Stoker's The Jewel of Seven Stars was published in 1903, technically after the end of the Gothic era, but this relatively close adaptation maintains many of those tropes. A mental hospital with screaming inmates and abusive doctors shows up several times. A crystal ball also puts in an appearance. There's a gorgeous, if brief, shot of fog filling a night street. The gothic aspect that most informs Blood from the Mummy's Tomb concerns a female protagonist uncertain of her own actions. As Queen Tara's spirit exerts more influence over Margaret, she increasingly loses control of her own body. Sometimes Margaret becomes a murdering femme fatale. Other times, she's horrified by what's happening around her. Valerie Leon's performance strikes the viewer as slightly wooden at first, but she grows into the role, effectively playing the unhinged and frightened aspects of her character. Valerie Leon can act, but I suspect she was cast for another reason. As I said, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb was made during Hammer's sex and violence era. As Queen Tara, Leon wears a strange Egyptian headdress that covers only most of her breast. The actress also wears various low-cut nightgowns and dresses. Aside from the nudity and semi-nudity, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb is pretty violent. Slit throats are a reoccurring image in the film, as a dozen people have their necks burst open. The conclusion features a fatal stab to the heart and a spurt of bright red gore. Though slightly slow-paced, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb does not skimp on the exploitation elements you expect from Hammer. It's perhaps appropriate that Blood from the Mummy's Tomb would be about an ancient curse. The production seemed to be cursed as well. Peter Cushing was originally meant to play Dr. Fuchs, but had to leave the production after one day to take care of his ailing wife. She would pass soon afterwards, and Cushing would never quite be the same. Original director Seth Holt, who previously made The Nanny and Taste of Fear for Hammer, died during production from a sudden heart attack. Michael Carreras, the same guy who directed Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, would complete film. Despite its troubled production, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb is a creepy, sexy horror picture, far better than the fourth entry in everybody's least favorite Hammer horror franchise has any right to be.
There is an ancient legend of a place known as the City of the Dead.
We call it the doorway to hell.
They came to uncover its secrets. They sought to unlock its treasure. What they did
I think this may be the Book of the Dead.
was unleash a force unlike any the world has ever known.
You have unleashed a creature that we have feared for more than 3,000 years.
Universal Pictures invites you to experience the adventure that will live forever.
If he turns me into a mummy, you're the first one I'm coming after.
In the early 90s, somebody at Universal got the idea to revive The Mummy.
In the early 90s, they kind of did a revival on all the monsters.
I guess they had seen the success of Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And there are some really fascinating what-if scenarios here. Clive Barker was going to make a Mummy movie that would apparently have been very sexual and weird and kinky, as you'd expect from Clive Barker. Joe Dante was going to make a version that would have starred Daniel Day-Lewis as Imhotep.
Man, that's amazing. And it probably would have had Rick Baker effects.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Oh, man.
George Romero was going to make one. Imhotep would have been the hero of the film, and Kyrese would have been the villain, and it would have featured some zombie movie-style gore, as you'd expect from George Romero.
I want to see any of these.
Yeah, all these sound like really cool concepts, but the version that ended up getting made was directed by a guy named Stephen Sommers, who had previously done Deep Rising and the live-action Jungle Book, the one with Jason Scott Lee that most people have forgotten about, but I actually kind of like.
I like that movie.
Yeah, and his idea was, hey, let's turn The Mummy into an Indiana Jones adventure blockbuster thing. And Universal liked that idea, and that was the movie we got. Something weird has happened over the last decade. When The Mummy came out in 1999, I loved it, but the general critical reaction was negative. It's almost been 20 years. This movie has become some sort of nostalgic, cultural checkpoint, and now everybody loves it.
Because the millennials that loved it as kids
are all teenagers
are
and
now
adults. Yeah. Basically, the only thing it has in common with that original Mummy is that Imhotep is trying to bring his girlfriend back to life.
But it's technically a different girlfriend. This one is Ankh-to-Amun.
Very, very similar. Ankh and Innamen, pretty much the same one. This one brings in this whole treasure hunting element.
So is Hamanatra a real thing?
No, Hamanatra was made up for the movie. They team
what
up.
About the Book of the Dead?
There is a Book of the Dead, but it's instructions for what to do in the afterlife.
I love this movie.
I love it. I like it a lot. It's really a very fun film. Stephen Sommers, he had this idea to infuse the classic monster with a pulpy Indiana Jones style spirit. This approach largely works. The script is always throwing some new monster or booby trap or crazy thing at the protagonist. The story is always escalating, so the audience is never bored. The tone is very tongue-in-cheek. There's a lot of humor. My problem with the film is that the writing, I would call it tacky. In an early scene, Evie causes the bookshelves in the library to domino down. Her boss, who is that character actor whose name I do not know, but I've seen him in 100 things, he comes out and he references the plagues of Egypt. Gee, that's going to be important later.
But I think it's purposefully tacky.
The beginning of the movie, there's some reference to, Hamanatra. They say the city could sink before the sands. And then what happens at the end of the movie? The city sinks beneath the sands.
It's tacky on purpose.
Comes dangerously close to spoon-feeding the audience information. But, it is concise. There's no denying that. It gets that information out there.
Okay, but I really like the guy who plays Jonathan.
John Hannah's the guy who plays Jonathan.
Okay, so John Hannah, I really like his delivery of those lines from the Bible.
Giving the Mummy the power of the 10 plagues was really a good way to make the Mummy intimidating. Because as I said, in those old movies, he's shambling, slow-moving, not very frightening. But in this one, they give him all sorts of fucking superpowers. What do you think of the humor in this?
I love all aspects of this movie.
I love Benny. Kevin J. O'Connor.
Look who has all of the horses. Hey, Benny, look who's on the wrong side of the river. I love Benny.
Apparently, the scene where he is confronted by the Mummy and then just starts praying to whichever deity he thinks will help him. Apparently, that survived from the Clive Barker version, which makes sense. That's totally a Clive Barker joke. I don't know how the history lines up there when he speaks Hebrew and the Mummy is like, the language of the slaves. Figure out your own timeline there. That actor, Kevin J. O'Connor, he's hilarious. Rick O'Connell is intimidating him by shoving his face into a ceiling fan, and he says something like, he just wants to bring his dead girlfriend back to life, and your sister. His delivery is very amusing. What do you think of this as a horror film?
See, that's tough. There are some elements that are spooky, but I don't know that overall it works as a horror film.
I wouldn't say it's scary, but I think it is surprisingly grisly for a PG-13 movie.
They do promise Indiana Jones versus the Mummy, and that's what we got.
I'm referring to stuff where he sucks the guy's eyeballs and tongues out.
I mean, that's cool.
Some workers get their skin melted with some sort of compressed salt thing.
Did the Egyptians really know how to do that?
Probably not.
Did they really pressurized salt traps in Egypt? We're looking that shit up after the
Probably not. The flesh-eating scarabs, which apparently was something that was cooked up for the Joe Dante version. That shit's pretty cool. These hordes of scarabs who will strip you to the bone in seconds.
Scarab beetles are a real thing.
Dung beetles in real life. They're not going to strip you to the bone in seconds or burrow under your skin like they do in this movie.
And cause you to run headfirst into a wall and kill yourself.
Yeah. This movie was made during the brief period when Brendan Fraser was a viable box office star.
Huh.
Yeah, remember that time? That weird time in the late 90s when Brendan Fraser was a movie star? George the Jungle was huge. Whatever the case may be, I do like him a lot in this film. He has really great chemistry with Rachel Weisz, and I honestly think that's one of the reasons why the film works so well.
Yeah.
You're still trying to get over Brendan Fraser box office star.
Yeah. But Rachel Weisz is hot.
I mean, she's a very attractive woman.
Black sheer outfit.
Yeah, she's attractive.
And is it weird that she's hotter with
the glasses
the
on?
veil and all that on?
No, not at all. And now we've been talking about him all fucking episode. What do we think of Arnold Vosloo?
He was a great Imhotep.
Physically not.
He's also immortal and a real mummy.
Arnold Vosloo doesn't strike me as particularly imposing, but he worked in this movie.
The man is Darkman in 2 of the movies.
Oh, those Darkman sequels are terrible. They bring Ardif Bey back as a character who's a completely different character. He's the leader of the, the Magi?
The Magi.
Yeah, the Pharaoh's protective agents. Moded Fier is good. He really gets all the ominous exposition.
Yeah, but I like Odette for however you say his name. He is probably my favorite character in the series.
Ardif Bey is.
Yeah, I think that's a key aspect that's missing from one of the later films.
That movie's missing a lot of things. I also like Bernard Fox, who shows up as the old drunk pilot, is a friend of O'Connell.
Yeah.
The little segment is cool. You know what's weird is most of the CGI in this movie still looks okay.
Yeah, for a movie made in 1999.
The early scenes when Imhotep is still the decomposing mummy, I guess it is cartoonish, but for me, I think it holds up pretty well, actually. I don't know.
Yeah, considering how old it is, it holds up really well.
Yeah, really the only CGI that looks bad to me is a stretchy jaw.
Now, is that the movie that started that whole thing? I know it's one of the first.
I'm not sure who did the stretchy jaw first. Not a big fan of the CGI when the mummy cast his face in the sandstorm. It's a cool sequence, but the CGI is a little cheesy.
Seriously, dude, you summon a sandstorm. Do you have to put your face on it? They already know you're coming to get them, and that you created that sandstorm.
That is some great face acting from Arnold Vosloo, though. This does have a horde of mummies that the heroes have to blow up, and lots of crazy action. That final act where Brendan Fraser's got the sword and he's chopping mummies left and right, all that stuff is really, really fun. Plot is convoluted. There's a lot of stuff in it. Oh, well, here's a new plague. Here's a new magic book. Here are the things you have to do to resurrect somebody. Why is the mummy afraid of cats? There's that whole group of American treasure hunters who exist just to be killed off.
Not to be a body counter, it's not a horror movie.
There are perhaps too many moving parts in the script, but overall, this movie is a lot of fun. Very, very entertaining film.
A force more powerful than any the world has ever known is about to be unleashed by the two people who should know better.
Oh no, not these guys again!
Universal Pictures presents Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, Arnold Vosloo, Odette Fair, Patricia Velasquez, introducing Freddie Both, and The Rock as the Scorpion King. The Mummy returns.
The Mummy was surprised that I don't think Universal was expecting it to be as big as it was. The day after it came out, Universal called up Stephen Sommers and said we need to make a sequel, which is why they got the sequel out so quickly. It came out in 2001, so just 2 years later. Fast turnaround for a blockbuster.
Yeah.
The Mummy Returns is not as good as the first one.
I like it.
A lot of people really do like this movie.
Definitely not as good as the first one. I will give you that. But I don't think it's terrible. I have heard you say this movie is terrible, and it's not terrible.
Terrible? No, it's not terrible, but it has a lot of problems.
We'll say writer's strike.
I don't think it was a writer's strike movie. I just was maybe rushed. This movie's
little pygmy mummies. I like pint-sized monsters. What can I say?
I don't like the pygmy mummies.
Why don't you like the pygmy mummies?
This whole movie is excessive. It's trying too hard to be bigger than the original in every single way. Too many of the things that made that first movie charming are left out. Characters are lost in a sea of special effects and sloppy writing.
Well, I can't even argue that point.
The kid is fucking annoying. The kid, Alex O'Connell, I want the mummy to eat that kid's eyeballs.
You want the mummy to eat a kid's eyeballs?
That actor is Freddie Boath. I don't know how the fuck you say it's B-O-A-T-H. He almost played Harry Potter, by the way. He turned down Harry Potter to make this movie. So in some alternate fucking universe, this dude is a huge star and Daniel Radcliffe is a nobody.
I pretty much hate it when any movie does a living MacGuffin.
This movie has 7 or 8 MacGuffins. There's at least 3 magical artifacts in the plot.
Yeah, I do like the black...
Oh, you mean Akinewe Agbaje Adewale?
That's who that is?
Yeah, that's who that is.
Shit went a for.
He's playing Killer Croc in Suicide Squad. Yeah,
that's the same guy?
That is the same guy.
Wow, he beefed up for that movie.
He did, and he has way too many vowels in his name.
Really, how dare you not choose your name?
The mythology is just really fucked up with this film. There's just too much magical bullshit going on in this film. Everybody is fated by destiny. One of the biggest ass pulls for the script is we discover that Evie is the reincarnation of the daughter of the pharaoh that Imhotep killed.
So that's the major plot hole. The whole reason that Imhotep was after Evie in the first movie is because she reminded him of Ankhsuamun.
Right.
And then in this one, it's Nefertiti.
They do reference in the first one that her mother was Egyptian. She has Egyptian blood. In no fucking universe is Rachel Weisz the daughter of a pharaoh.
But we do get to see her in that outfit.
Egyptian bikini she wears in the fight scene.
Yeah, that very one.
And then we also learn that Rick is a magi. He has a magical tattoo, and he was raised in an orphanage. It's funny that none of that information came up in the first film, isn't it?
Or that tattoo even was on his wrist.
It's a total ass-pull. Desperate attempt to make the story come together.
And then the scepter that Jonathan carries around the whole movie. It's a
oh, I know.
It's a spear!
That is straight up Deus Ex Machina. Some magical artifact that falls out of the goddamn sky that resolves the story. The script is as sloppy as can be.
I will agree with that.
Brendan Fraser was really...
But the movie's not boring.
You know, I'll give you that. The movie is not boring. Brendan Fraser was really charming in that first one, but in this one, he's surrounded by so much CGI bullshit that he just doesn't know how to react.
Can we talk about the CGI? Most of it's okay. It's passable. But The Rock, the Scorpion King, that looks like a fucking video game character on PS1.
Somehow the CGI is worse than in the first one. Towards the beginning, when the mummies are leaping around on the walls and chasing after them in the double-decker bus, or when Imhotep does the face trick again but with the water, that CGI water looks bad.
Yes, it does.
And not like Michael Jackson bad, just shit bad. By the time the Pygmy Mummy show up, we've left any semblance of reality behind.
I will say this about the Pygmy Mummies, even though I find them hilarious. What the fuck is a pygmy doing in the middle of Egypt?
Well, they're in this magical oasis built around the pyramid.
But the pyramid's Egyptian, and the outer landscape is Egyptian.
We find out in the Scorpion King solo movie, he's actually from the Middle East. He's from Arcadia or some shit.
Anyhow. But everything in Oasis is very Amazonian.
Yeah, I've always felt that way, too.
I'm not saying it's a perfect movie. When I went to see this movie in theaters, I went to be entertained.
Oh, I loved it as a kid.
I am still thoroughly entertained by this movie.
Patricia Velasquez comes back as the modern-day reincarnation of Nong Sunamun. We didn't mention this when we were talking about the last one. She's a very beautiful woman.
Oh, yeah.
And she's almost naked in that first movie.
Oh, yeah.
But she can't act worth shit.
Oh, no.
They introduced this character called Izzy, who has a balloon zeppelin thing, and he's so annoying. I can't stand that character.
I love Izzy.
No, Izzy's really annoying.
Because he got shot in the ass.
There is a lot of action in this. There's a huge shootout at the O'Connell's house. There's a shootout in the museum. There's a double-decker bus chase.
So one annoying thing that I did spot in this movie. How many times do they want to do that thing where somebody throws something at O'Connell, he catches it and throws it back at him?
They do that at least once a movie.
They did it 5 times in this movie. She throws a snake at him, he catches it and throws it back at her.
That's part of, we gotta give the audience more of what was in the first one. Speaking of lazy writing decisions, so Evie gets killed, and then they magically bring her back with the magic book, and I know the magic book is there, but it's the laziest death cheat possible.
Well, if they would have killed her off, it would have made more sense in the third one when they cast not Rachel Weisz.
What do we think of the Anubis warriors?
Well, I know you don't like them, but I like them.
By the time we get to that point, are we still watching a Mummy movie? Arnold Vosloo and Brendan Fraser fighting in slow motion with Matrix-y bullet time, and...
Okay, but Anubis... But can we talk about the Japanese size?
What the fuck are up with the Japanese size in ancient Egypt? Imhotep enters the temple of the Scorpion King, he loses his powers, and they have to outrun the sun, and there's just so much mythological bullshit in this movie. Now, before we finish up, we have to talk about the Scorpion King. Most of this movie's advertising campaign was built around that character.
Who's in it for 2 minutes.
Yeah, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. He was still The Rock at the time. We didn't know who the fuck Dwayne Johnson was yet. It's sort of funny to go back and watch this movie now that he's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. And back then, he was just a wrestler trying to make it big, because his acting has come a long way. And it doesn't help that he's replaced with a truly atrocious CGI creation in the last
video game
act.
character in the middle of a live action
Yeah,
movie.
it looks terrible. And before we move on, I have seen the Scorpion King movie, and I remember it being really goofy, but kind of fun in an 80s sword and sandal kind of way.
Yeah.
I did not see any of the direct-to-video sequels, which apparently the most recent one came out last year. Oh, and there was a cartoon. You remember the Mummy, the animated series?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
I remembered it was centered around Alex and his magic bracelet.
I watched 1 or 2 episodes of the cartoon, and even as a kid I thought it was terrible, so I'm sure it's even worse now. The only Mummy cartoon show I gave a shit about was Mummy That's Alive.
We found it, Professor. It's the tomb of the Dragon Emperor and his army.
2,000 years ago, China's Dragon Emperor conquered half the world. Now, he is returning to finish the job.
Here we go again.
I put down more mummies in my time than you.
You put down one mummy, Dad.
Yeah, same mummy, twice.
Beyond death, beyond imagination, lies an adventure that will live for all eternity.
The Mummy Returns made money, slightly less money than the first one, but it was still a big hit. But for some reason, they decided they didn't want to do another one. But in 2006, Universal, out of the blue, announced, hey, we're doing a Rick O'Connell movie. They didn't say they were doing a third Mummy movie. They said we're doing a Rick O'Connell spin-off movie. That, at some point, morphed into a third Mummy film, because I don't think the non-Mummy adventures of Rick O'Connell would be very interesting. Both Stephen Sommers and Rachel Weisz opted out of The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Rob Cohen of Triple X and the Fast and the Furious fame directed this movie. It's set 13 years after The Mummy Returns. twins. Rick and Evie are now retired. Evie writes novels based off the Mummy adventures. Alex is now 20 and an archaeologist in his own right. In China, he uncovers the tomb of the Dragon Emperor, this ancient emperor who built the Great Wall of China, mastered the 5 elements, and sought to become immortal, but was cursed to become a deathless mummy.
Okay, so in China there's 5 elements.
According to this fucking movie, there is anyway. Something goes screwy, he comes back to life, wants to rule the world, yada yada yada. This is something I thought I'd never say. Rob Cohen makes me yearn for the comparatively subtle filmmaking of Stephen Sommers.
But this movie does do some interesting things.
Oh, there are some conceptually fun ideas.
The movie's not good.
Not good, no. Everything about it feels unnecessary.
I like a kung fu mummy. That seems like a cool idea.
Getting Jet Li to play an evil supervillain, and he kicks a rocket into a trolley train. I like the terracotta soldiers, that's cool.
Yeah, the terracotta soldiers. The 3-headed dragon.
You know, Jet Li turns into both King Ghidorah and King Caesar in this movie.
Yes.
I even like the garbage-picking, field-goal-kicking Philadelphia Yetis. But the execution leaves something to be desired.
I do like that they tried to do things differently with this mummy. It's not a mummy in wraps.
Yeah, he's got the terracotta mask on.
Because she cursed him to be encased in terracotta. It's pretty cool that if it gets broken or shattered, it regrows and it's painful for him.
How is it that this movie was made almost 10 years after the first Mummy, and its CGI is way worse?
As they learned how to do CGI quickly and cheaply, the quality goes down.
Those Yetis look like shit. Emperor's mummy form looks like shit. The good mummy soldiers that show up at the end look like something from a PlayStation 2 era cutscene.
They should have done that stop motion.
God, I would have loved that. Rob Cohen's made some very successful popular films, but his direction is fucking terrible in this movie. They activate all these death traps, and one is the spinning destructo disc that can somehow seek people out, and it literally just comes out of nowhere, pops onto the screen. Or there's a scene where a Dragon Emperor decapitates a dude, and you see him jab, and then the guy's head flies through the screen in slow motion. It looks really, really stupid. The visual presentation of the film is dumb. What do we think of the new cast members in this, huh?
Well, Jet Li's awesome.
He's cool, but he doesn't get a lot to do. He's mostly replaced with CGI.
When he's just being the prick emperor,
the jerk-ass emperor,
he's pretty convincing.
Jet Li is cool. I wish they had more of him in the movie. Too much of the film is CGI.
Right. I don't like the new Evie. There is no chemistry between her and Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's really missed in this movie. I feel like if Rachel Weisz had come back, it would have been significantly better.
I like Maria Bello as an actress, but she doesn't work in this movie. She goes for camp. She doesn't have the sincerity that Rachel Weisz had.
And Michelle Yeoh is always beautiful and awesome.
Wish she had more to do.
Got very little to do, but still.
Brendan Fraser seems tired in this movie. He does not seem invested in the material.
Look, guys, it's paycheck.
Alex is still annoying. Luke Ford is the actor playing Alex in this.
Okay, but he is significantly better. Nowhere near as annoying as the kid.
I don't know, man. Pretty fucking annoying.
Yeah, but you have very low tolerance for people.
That's true. I hate most people. I look at people and see nothing worth liking. John Hannah is back.
He always adds a little something to the movies, you know?
He does have that weird scene where he falls in love with a yak.
No, that's just Jonathan.
It's bad. Like the idea of expanding the Mummy franchise past Egypt. They had mummies in China. It ends with Jonathan saying, I'm going to South America where there are no mummies.
And then he goes on to Peru.
And then it says mummies were then discovered in Peru. They could have had him fighting Aztec mummies. That would have been cool.
Quetzalcoatl could have been there.
Yeah, that shit would have been cool. They could have done a sequel set in Scotland with the bog mummies, and they could have brought in Scottish mythology. All that would have been really awesome. But sadly, this movie fucking sucked. It still made money. The film was successful financially, but everybody decided some things should stay dead. Evil Egyptian mummies and franchises that are way past their expiration date.
Welcome to a new world of gods and monsters.
The hieroglyph said she was named Amenet, chosen to be Egypt's next queen. But her thirst for power led her down a darker path, one that had to be stopped.
Because of your actions, this ancient power has returned. You are alive because you were chosen. By what? The ultimate evil.
Legend has it she's a being of unimaginable powers.
She will not stop until she has remade our world into her own.
When we first decided we were going to do this episode, this was news, but now it's old news. So recently, there has been a lot of hubbubaloo about Universal's attempt to turn their monster movies into a cinematic universe. They want what Marvel has, but with monsters. And a lot of people are against this idea.
I love this idea.
They're calling it the Dark Universe, which I admit is not a catchy name.
Well, Monsterverse was taken.
Yeah, legendary. Their Godzilla King Kong films are being called the Monsterverse. I think a lot of people aren't aware of the history. Universal did it first. In 1941 or whenever, when Frankenstein met the Wolfman. That was the first cinematic cinematic universe. So I love the idea. I'm not a huge fan of turning the monsters into big budget special effects movies. I think some of the talent they've lined up is pretty cool. I'm looking forward to Javier Bardem as Frankenstein if indeed that movie gets made. But the first film in the Dark Universe has come out, The Mummy. What are our general thoughts on this?
I think overall it's good. It's a decent start. It's a solid start.
I thought it was okay. I've been really surprised by the vitriol this film has produced. A lot of people not only dislike this movie, they hate it. And I'm surprised. I thought it was okay. Parts of it were boring, but I actually really liked other elements. Found it to be decently entertaining, special effects driven popcorn muncher with some minor spooky touches. They have enough horror in this that it still felt a little bit like a horror movie.
Yeah.
We've got some zombie mummy minions.
I mean, there's some humor in it, but it's not as...
Oh, there's a lot of humor. Tom Cruise has a ghost sidekick.
Okay, but you love that shit in American Werewolf.
It's not as well done here.
That's fair.
I'm not a huge Tom Cruise fan. The early scenes do feel like a Mission Impossible movie.
Yeah. I'm not a Tom Cruise fan.
I don't dislike him, but I don't really care about him.
At some point, are we ever going to realize that he's too old to be an action star?
Well, it helps that he's fucking ageless. He looks about 20 years younger than he actually is.
I know, he's actually 70, but looks 50.
Who knows if it's the plastic surgery or the thetans that are keeping him young.
It's the thetans.
Yeah. The whole idea that he is infected with this curse, that stuff doesn't interest me, and I really do not care about his blonde love interest.
Yeah, you mean not Blake Lively?
Yeah, the entire emotional crux of the movie is based around this girl he has romantic chemistry with. Her fate is a pivotal part of the conclusion of the film. I didn't care, and that's a big problem
That
with
whole
the
last
film.
15 minutes, I didn't really...
And a lot of people have been shitting on Russell Crowe as Mr. Hyde.
I actually liked the Mr. Hyde stuff.
The fight was fun. That fight that he has with Tom Cruise in The Office was cool.
Yeah.
A lot of people have been making fun of Russell Crowe's accent, but you know what? Russell Crowe is an insane man who throws phones at people. I'm not going to make fun of his accent because he will come up to me and beat me up. He's an angry Australian
he will literally
man.
beat you up.
I'm not going to fuck with Russell Crowe.
He's a gladiator, bitch.
He killed Joaquin Phoenix.
I think I like the Hyde stuff more than I like the Jekyll stuff.
I've been saying before, I think Jekyll and Hyde is a weird character to be Universal's.
Nick Fury.
Nick Fury. It should have been Van Helsing. I mean, I would have gone with Dr. Pretorius, but Van Helsing would have been a better choice. Naming the super secret organization, their BPRD equivalent, Protogeum. What the fuck does that even mean? That was an
Yeah, it
awkward...
should have been Fritz. Fritz is a way better name.
Okay, we
And
got to
let's
talk about this.
movie.
A year or two ago, JD conceptualized a film, and I wrote an outline called House of the Gill Man. That was our attempt to do a big budget monster movie. And in that script, there is a super secret organization that monitors monster activity around the globe, which is not an original idea by any means. However, this movie does have that as well. And what really makes me want to call my lawyer, well, it's an early scene where they're on the plane, birds are flying at the plane, and it kills the pilots, and they go into a tailspin, is very, very similar to a sequence from our unproduced screenplay. The only difference is it's bat. So I'm just saying, Universal, are you stalking us?
If you want to use our ideas, then use us.
I think we have grounds for a lawsuit.
And Protogeum, what the fuck?
Yeah, Fritz as a meaningless acronym is way better. In our script, the secret organization is called Fritz, and it's an acronym that doesn't mean anything. Overall, I found the action scenes in The Mummy pretty cool. There's a cool sequence where they're swimming away from mummy zombies underwater, or there's a cool car chase where the mummies are crawling on the car. Final half of the movie takes place in the English subway. I thought that stuff was pretty cool. Wasn't a huge fan of the sandstorm through England, leaning a little too hard on trying to copy what the Summers films did.
So let's talk about monster design a little bit.
Oh, you want to talk about Sophia Botella?
Yeah, but I wanted to be less creepy about it and say let's talk about monster design. First of all, the concept of the female mummy. Love that idea.
Yeah.
The two irises.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure about it in the trailer, but I think it works in the film. I don't care about her origin. Oh, she sells her soul to Set, the god of the dead. Set was not the god of the dead.
I know you had major issue with that.
Yeah, that bugged me. Look it up on Wikipedia, assholes. It's not hard.
The tattoos were kind of a neat touch.
Oh, I liked that a lot.
The overall mummy design was pretty cool.
And another thing I took from the Stevens film is that she starts out as a corpse and then sucks people dry and gets more and more human as the story goes on.
But they make it scarier.
I don't know if it was scary, but it was cool. I dug it. But we gotta talk about Sophia Botella wearing nothing but bandages.
I mean, there's that.
She's a very attractive woman.
But I was going to go into her powers.
Oh yeah, that's cool too. They have this whole element where she can control rats and storm. She has all sorts.
So I don't like the rat thing. I like that she can summon zombies.
Yeah, that's cool. The way they justified the Templar Knight zombies was weird, and execution was cool.
I think it's cool to give a mummy dominion over something. So then, does that mean in the mashup the mummy can control Frankenstein? Because
well, that mashup that may or may not happen now. This movie has not been doing well at the box office.
I thought it was doing well overseas.
Totally flopped domestically. It has been doing better overseas, but was announced recently that Universal is going to lose $90 million on this film. So I don't know what the status size of the Dark Universe is right now.
Honestly, I think Universal will try with one more movie.
It seems like they're moving ahead with The Bride of Frankenstein. That's going to be directed by Bill Condon, going to star Javier Bardem as the monster. They are close to getting Angelina Jolie for The Bride. Not a huge fan of that. Really excited to see Bill Condon directing a real Frankenstein movie. He made Gods and Monsters. He respects these films. He's a fan. There are some little Easter eggs in here I like. The vampire skull or the Gillman hand.
Yeah.
What's weird is they don't have any throwbacks to the original classic Mummy, but they do have a reference to the Stephen Sommers films. And overall, I was enjoying it up until about the last 15 minutes, where it really leans way too hard on the setting up the sequel stuff. But up until that point, I thought it was okay. Not great, not terrible, alright.
You know what I like most about the movie? Completely ditched the magic book thing. He sets her free by setting her free.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the way a mummy's curse should work.
The movie still has a magic MacGuffin with that whole dagger bullshit business.
Well, yeah.
Being monster fans, we're a little more willing to forgive Universal for the flaws in this. But I think this movie's better than Dracula Untold. I'll give it that.
I like Dracula. Bat fist. You know what the mummy was missing?
A sand fist?
A sand fist.
Buried beneath the sands of time, something ancient stirs, something evil waits. From Bram Stoker, the master of terror and suspense, comes the modern-day legend of the Mummy, starring Lou Gossett Jr.
Tonight, it will be my destiny to bring her back to life.
Bram Stoker's The Mummy.
Before we wrap up, I've got a list of some other mummy movies here. A lot of these I have not seen, a few of them I have. In 1957 in Mexico,
The Robot versus the Aztec.
Yeah, there was a series of movies about the Aztec Mummy. The Aztec Mummy, Curse of the Aztec Mummy, The Robot versus the Aztec Mummy. All these came out in 1957. And then they had The Wrestling Women versus the Aztec Mummy in 1964. This is one from 1980 that I've been wanting to see. It's called The Awakening. It stars Charlton Heston. It's another adaptation of Bram Stoker's Jewel of the Seven Stars.
80s monster effects?
Yeah,
a mummy movie?
It's not a movie that people talk about. It doesn't really have much of a following or anything, so I'm intrigued about
We'll have to look up some clips from it.
Yeah, that same story, Jewel of the Seven Stars, was later adapted in 1998 as Bram Stoker's The Mummy. It's almost as if they were trying to cash in on another mummy movie that came out that year. The movie was originally released as Bram Stoker's The Mummy, and then Universal threatened to sue them, so they changed it to Bram Stoker's Curse of the Mummy. I haven't seen it. Is it terrible?
Direct-to-video mummy movie.
Okay, so it's bad. Lou Gossett Jr.'s in it.
It's not even bad, it's just boring. Barely see the mummy at all. They couldn't even afford to do the mummy makeup.
There's a movie from 1982 called Time Walker that I want to see. It's a New World Picture film. And 1997, there was the Disney Channel original Under Wraps. Yeah, I watched a lot as a kid, and I really enjoyed goofy mummy shenanigans, but I remember it being pretty charming. I have no idea if it holds up. I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
It probably holds up the same as Halloween Town.
Halloween Town is pretty good.
It's way better than a Disney Channel movie should be. I'll just put it that way.
Also in 1999, there was something called Tale of the Mummy, which was directed by Russell Macaulay of Highlander fame, and I think starred Casper Van Dien. One of the best mummy movies ever made is Bubba Hotep from 2002. Have I ever made you watch Bubba Hotep? Bruce Campbell plays geriatric Elvis in a retirement home fighting a mummy. It's so fucking amazing. Directed by the guy who made Phantasm. Ozzie Davis plays JFK. Oh, and then there was The Pyramid in 2014, which was a found footage mummy movie, right?
Well, there was no mummies in it.
Really? It was sold as a mummy movie.
It was sold as a mummy movie, but it's got an Anubis warrior thing in it.
But it is a found footage film, right?
It is a found footage film.
Okay.
And it's weird mummy zombie cats.
Was it any good?
I don't know. I'll let you watch it and make your own.
People didn't seem to like it. It wasn't well received.
It definitely wasn't scary.
Most of these movies not being very good is just a testament to how difficult the mummy is to do. It's a harder type of monster to do than a vampire or a werewolf.
I don't know why.
It's hard to get Egypt involved without actually going to Egypt. It's hard to justify a mummy being somewhere else. Do we have absolutely anything else to say about the sands of Egypt, my friend?
Gets everywhere.
If you would like to contact us, you may find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/thebangersandmashow. We got a new like on the Facebook page, and we got a comment on the Horror Host episode. Thanks, as always, to the support from our fans. Episodes have been coming out slower here of late, though. I'm hoping to get some more out. There's going to be some more episodes that are like the RoboCop episode. There's going to be some more stuff like that. Anywho, so anything else we want to say here, Mr. Mash, about mummies?
I'd have to say it's a wrap.
It's a wrap. Put it in its tomb and put it to sleep.
May you sleep in your sarcophagus tonight. Don't let the scarab beetle bite.
Little boy named Presley found a secret out this year.